Have you ever been told by your own family that you just weren't leadership material, not because you made a mistake, not because you weren't qualified, but because you didn't fit the version of success they had in their heads? And your last name wasn't enough to save you from being erased. That was me. And this is where my revenge story began. 3 years ago, I was the youngest VP at Langdon Holdings, my family's multi-billion-dollar conglomerate. I'd earned that role the hard way, not through favours, not through bloodline, but by turning around a sinking consumer division and tripling its revenue in 14 months. But none of that mattered in the Langdon boardroom. That morning, I walked in wearing my usual black turtleneck and slacks, laptop under one arm, confidence under the other. The quarterly marketing report was strong, stronger than projections, and I knew it. We'd cracked a campaign that went viral without paid ads. I was ready to present. I didn't even make it past the second slide. My father, Graham Langdon, cleared his throat. "Avery," he said, "let's not waste the board's time." I froze. "Excuse me?" He gestured toward the conference table. "We've already reviewed the material, and we've decided on a new direction, effective immediately." My heart dropped. A new direction? My older brother Lucien leaned back in his chair, smirking. "The company needs stronger leadership, less emotion, more edge." Emotion. That word, that weapon. My mother, Claire, placed a hand on my wrist. "Sweetheart, you're so creative, but this world, it's not always kind. We worry you're not built for this kind of pressure." I looked at each of them. No one met my eye. Not my aunt, not the CFO, not even Sienna, my sister-in-law, who once called me the smartest person in the family group chat. It wasn't a debate. It was an ambush. They offered me a graceful exit. "Step down as VP," they said. "Take some time to find yourself." They'd honour my contributions, of course. Offer consulting if I ever needed a side project. But here was the kicker. To make the transition clean, they wanted me to sign away my board voting rights and cash out my equity at a fair rate. I was 30. I wasn't married. I had no one to back me. And in one morning I went from vice president to ghost. I remember walking out of that boardroom shaking, not because I lost a title, but because I realised they'd never seen me as worthy of it to begin with. The Langdon name was everything to them, but somehow when it came to me, that name turned into a leash. That night I sat on the floor of my one-bedroom apartment, the same one I moved into during grad school. The papers they gave me were spread across the rug. Severance, NDA, equity buyout. I stared at the line where my name should go. And I didn't cry, I didn't scream, I didn't call a friend or post some cryptic quote on social media. I grabbed a pen, signed, and I opened a blank Google Doc. The title, Falcon Ridge Capital, Phase 1. No one would know it was me. No one would know what I was building. Because if my family couldn't see my value, I'd make damn sure the world did. Not through speeches, not through confrontation, but through acquisition, one deal at a time. Over the next few months, I taught myself how to navigate private equity. I took midnight calls with startup founders in Singapore, read SEC filings like bedtime stories, and tracked every slip Langdon Holdings made in the market. They were too busy congratulating themselves on tradition to notice how outdated their practices had become. Meanwhile, I bought. Quietly. Stake by stake. Tiny funds, dormant shares, dissatisfied retirees, old vendors, disillusioned partners. Each deal got me closer to the 51% I needed. But back then, I was just a girl in a sweater, working from a desk in a one-window apartment. The disappointment of the Langdon family, the one no one bothered to ask about at family dinners, the one they introduced with a sympathetic chuckle and a patronising "she's still finding her path." They had no idea. By the time year 1 ended, Falcon Ridge had closed 5 deals. By year 2, we had a portfolio across 3 continents. By year 3, I was ready to buy the empire they worshipped more than their own children, and I was going to do it in the exact same outfit I was wearing the day they pushed me out. Because power doesn't need glitter, it just needs a memory, and I remembered everything. The first week after I left Langdon Holdings, I didn't do much. I didn't fly to Bali to find myself. I didn't post a rebrand announcement on LinkedIn. I didn't even tell the few friends I had left. I just stayed in that small apartment, worked, planned, healed, sort of. The air was quieter now, and lonelier, the kind of quiet where your phone doesn't ring for days, except for bank alerts and 2-for-1 pizza coupons. Not a single "how are you" from my family, not even a happy birthday 2 months later. I guess when you stop being useful to powerful people, they forget your number real quick. But if I learned one thing from my years in corporate, it's this. You don't fight power by yelling at it. You dismantle it, slowly, strategically, and in silence. So that's what I did. I took the severance they handed me like a consolation prize and turned it into seed capital. I opened a shell company under a new name, Falcon Ridge Capital. No Langdon, no legacy, just me. And I didn't want investors, didn't want press, didn't want approval. All I wanted was leverage. The first company I bought was a crumbling logistics firm in Nevada. Langdon Holdings had tried to gut them during a hostile contract renegotiation the year before. I remembered the CEO, an older man named Morris, quiet, sharp, and exhausted from fighting giants. I flew out, alone. He blinked when he saw me. "Didn't expect someone your age," he said. "Didn't expect someone still standing," I replied. We signed a deal in a diner off Highway 95. I wired him the funds by the time my toast was cold. From there, it snowballed. I studied distressed assets like other people watch TV. I tracked old vendors Langdon Holdings pushed out. I called retirees, pension funds, shareholders who'd once begged for attention at annual meetings and got nothing but polite dismissal. I offered them something Langdon never gave: respect, transparency, and a way out. One by one they sold. They didn't know it was me. No one did. Because Falcon Ridge had no public face. Just initials, A.L. Rivers. And let's be honest, no one in my family ever cared enough to ask what A.L. stood for. They just assumed if they didn't see me, I didn't exist. Fine. Let them believe that. You know what hurts more than betrayal? Invisibility. Not when enemies attack, but when people who share your last name act like you never mattered to begin with. That kind of silence, it carves something deep into you. You stop craving approval, you stop needing applause, but the ache, it doesn't vanish, it just gets repurposed into drive, into discipline, into something much colder than rage. By the end of year 1, Falcon Ridge had closed 5 strategic acquisitions. By year 2, we had holding companies in Canada, Germany, Vietnam, and the UAE. I spent more time in airport lounges than I did in my own bed. Half the time I was negotiating in yoga pants and a ponytail from whatever hotel Wi-Fi didn't crash. No board meetings, no politics, no suit and tie nonsense, just real work, real strategy, real results, and not a single Langdon knew, because they never looked past their own shadows long enough to see anyone else rising. There was this one night around year 2.5, I remember it so vividly. I was on a red-eye flight back from Tokyo. We'd just closed $1 billion tech acquisition that Langdon Holdings had been circling for years but never sealed. I opened the news app mid-air, and there it was. Langdon Holdings stock drops 8% on failed acquisition bid. I smiled, not because they failed, but because I was done needing them to win. For the first time, my work wasn't about revenge. It was about reclamation, reclaiming my own worth, reclaiming the voice they muted, and most of all, reclaiming the story they tried to write for me. It's funny. People think revenge stories are about fire and fury, dramatic showdowns, courtroom screams breaking glass. But the real ones, they're quieter, lonelier, built brick by brick while the world isn't watching. And sometimes they start in apartments like mine, with nothing but silence, spreadsheets, and a memory that refuses to fade. I don't know who needs to hear this, but if you've ever been made to feel like you weren't enough, if they've stopped calling, if they roll their eyes when you say you're still building something, You don't need their permission to become everything they said you couldn't. You don't even need their attention. You just need time and grit and the belief that you're not crazy for wanting more than crumbs, because you're not. And if that stirred something in you, I get it. I really do. The annual Langdon Winter Dinner was exactly what you'd imagine, catered by some chef my mum name-dropped every 5 minutes, live quartet playing Christmas renditions of corporate jingles, tables decorated in white linen and gold foil place cards, like we were all in some elite country club no one asked to join, but everyone fought to stay in. And me, I was seated at the far end of the table, no name card, no eye contact. Just enough space between me and the centre of power to make a statement louder than words. 3 years since they pushed me out, and they still invited me, like I was some sad family mascot. The girl who used to be in business, now treated like a slightly embarrassing cousin they can't quite uninvite. I wore a simple black sweater and tailored slacks. No designer label, no statement earrings, just me, present, unimpressed. Another record quarter! Lucian raised his glass from the centre of the table. His cufflinks sparkled more than the chandelier above him. We landed the Porton deal, he said proudly, straightening the CFO pin on his lapel like he'd earned it with sweat and not a shared last name. The table clapped. My mother beamed. Sienna whispered something snide to the woman next to her, glancing toward me. I kept my hands in my lap, quietly checking my phone under the tablecloth. Phase finalisation complete. Legal paperwork ready. Awaiting your confirmation. The message from Falcon Ridge's legal team sat on the lock screen like a quiet exhale. Avery, dear. My mother's voice floated across the table like perfume, artificial and layered. Still doing that, what do you call it? Remote consulting? I looked up, smiled politely. Something like that. Lucian chuckled. Hard to keep track when there's no office or real deliverables. You should consider applying to HR, Dad added, half serious. We could use someone with your empathetic skills. There it was again. The backhanded pity wrapped in silk napkins and fake concern. They had no idea they were toasting their own irrelevance. Sienna glanced down at my outfit. I love how you've committed to your comfort over couture aesthetic, she said sweetly. Takes confidence to show up like that. I sipped my water. Comfort's underrated in hostile negotiations. She blinked. Negotiations? I smiled. My phone buzzed again. Stock transfer complete. Falcon Ridge Capital now holds 51% controlling interest in Langdon Holdings. For a second, I just sat there, watching the way their smiles didn't reach their eyes, the way they talked over the staff like they were invisible, the way my father interrupted the youngest cousin mid-sentence to correct her grammar. The whole table was built on inheritance, ego, and assumptions. And they had no clue the foundation was already crumbling beneath them. Dad raised his glass again. To Langdon Holdings, may we continue leading with tradition, excellence, and vision. I tilted my head. Tradition, like when they used it to justify pushing me out. Excellence, as in excluding anyone who didn't wear a tie. Vision, blind to the fact that the world had moved on without them. Cheers, I said quietly, lifting my water. Lucian leaned toward Mum. We should talk strategy before the board meeting next week. Oh yes, Sienna chimed in. Avery never shows up to those, probably doesn't remember where the office is. I'll be attending this one, I said simply. The table paused. My father froze mid-sip. Lucian laughed, thinking I was joking. You're not even on the board. I pulled out my phone, tapped twice. The documents opened clearly on the screen facing him. I think you'll find that's changed. Sienna narrowed her eyes. What are you talking about? I looked at each of them, then placed the phone on the table, angled just enough for them to read. Falcon Ridge Capital, controlling owner 51.2%, Langdon Holdings. Dad's voice dropped. That's impossible. Lucian stood so fast his chair scraped back. You can't just buy us out. I met his eyes. Turns out I can. The room fell into stunned silence. You could hear the knives against porcelain, the scratch of linen as people adjusted themselves, trying to make sense of what just happened. "But Falcon Ridge is run by," Lucienne began, grasping. "A.L. Rivers," I offered. "That's me. Avery Langdon Rivers. I used Mum's maiden name." Mum actually clutched her pearls. I didn't know people really did that. "You've been this whole time?" she whispered. I nodded. "While you were mocking my little online job, I was acquiring stakes, quietly, thoroughly, legally." Sienna's voice trembled. "You're bluffing." My phone pinged again. "Board notified, transfer registered, voting rights effective immediately." I slid it toward her. "Bluffing takes energy. I prefer paperwork." For a moment no one said anything. Then Dad's voice, hoarse, bitter, cut the silence. "You did this to us?" I tilted my head. "No, I did this because of you." You ever had that moment where the people who once dismissed you suddenly realize they don't know who you are anymore? Yeah. If you've ever dreamed of that exact second when silence says everything louder than words, drop it in the comments. I'm still catching my breath, and we're only just getting started. The next morning, I stood outside Langdon Holdings for the first time in 3 years. Same marble steps, same revolving glass doors, same outdated mission statement etched into the wall, leading with legacy. I used to walk through those doors every day, quietly shrinking a little more each time, trying to fit into a version of success that didn't have room for someone like me. Today, I didn't shrink. Today, I walked in like I owned the place, because now I did. The lobby was just as I remembered it, too cold, too white, too performative. Receptionists typing like their jobs depended on the sound of keys. A security guard I vaguely recognised did a double take as I passed through. "Miss Langdon?" he stammered. "You're not on the approved list for executive access." I smiled, calm and deliberate. "Check again." He hesitated. I pulled out my new ID badge and handed it to him. His eyes scanned the name. Avery L. Rivers, CEO, Falcon Ridge, capital majority shareholder, Langdon Holdings. I watched the realization click into place. He stepped aside. "My apologies, Ms. Rivers. Elevator to the executive floor is unlocked." Funny. 3 years ago, I had to badge in through the side entrance because the system kept forgetting I was VP, not anymore. The elevator ride felt different this time, still smooth but heavier with anticipation. I checked my phone. Emails from my legal team, my press advisor, and, ironically, Lucian himself. Subject line, urgent, please call me. I didn't. When the doors opened, the executive floor was buzzing. Whispers, phones, nervous pacing. They knew something was coming. They just didn't know it looked like me. The boardroom was filled with familiar faces, every one of them older, smugger, and at that moment visibly rattled. Lucian was already there, standing at the head of the table, trying to command the room with half sentences and hollow reassurances. Sienna sat beside him, her smile more strained than usual. My father sat in the same leather chair he'd occupied for 30 years, arms crossed, jaw clenched. I walked in without a word. The room fell completely silent. Lucian turned, blinking. "What are you doing here?" I didn't answer. I simply walked to the head of the table, placed my laptop down, and looked at my father. "Dad," I said evenly, "that's my chair now." For a moment, I saw something flash across his face. Shock? Pride? Rage? I couldn't tell. But he stood, slowly, silently, and stepped aside. I took the seat. I opened my laptop. The screen lit up with the first slide of the presentation I'd spent the last week preparing. Langdon Holdings, Post-Acquisition Restructure, Phase 1. "Good morning," I said, my voice calm but deliberate. "Let's begin." Charlotte, one of the board members who'd once whispered that I was too sensitive to lead, cleared her throat. "I don't understand. What changes are being proposed?" I clicked to the next slide. "First," I said, "a full audit of all executive performance, departmental reviews, profitability assessments, redundancy evaluations, no exceptions. Lucian's face blanched. Second, I continued, immediate suspension of executive perks pending review. That includes private jet usage, expense accounts, monthly luxury stipends, and yes, Sienna, the corporate shopping allowance. She actually gasped. I had to suppress a smirk. Third, I paused for effect, we'll be introducing a modern operational model. That means hybrid work structures, results-based leadership, and a reallocation of capital into underserved innovation teams. My father shook his head. That's not how business is done. No, I agreed. That's not how you did business. And respectfully, look where that got you. Lucian stood, trembling. This is a family company. You can't just waltz in here and change everything. I met his eyes. Funny how family only matters when you feel like you're losing something. Silence. I turned to the room. Was I family when you stripped me of my title, when you refused to hear me out, when you laughed about my little remote consulting gig at the dinner table? No one spoke. Exactly. My phone buzzed again. Shadow Peak, 12 new acquisition candidates, portfolio review scheduled, stock up 11% since announcement. I closed the notification with a tap. You all dismissed me because I didn't fit your mold, because I didn't speak like you, dress like you, chase titles the same way you did. I looked around the boardroom. Once a stage for their performances, now mine. I wasn't broken. I was just building something different, and now that something owns you. A hush fell over the room, and I didn't fill it. I let the silence speak, let them sit with the weight of it. This wasn't about revenge. It was about reclaiming the space I was never supposed to leave in the first place. You ever walk into a room where they once decided your worth and take back every inch of it? If you've ever imagined that moment, not with rage but with resolve, you're not alone, you're just getting started. Now came the resistance. The room felt like a pressure cooker, suits shifting in chairs, eyes darting between me and Lucien, like they couldn't decide who still held the real power. Lucien was still standing, hands braced on the table, trying to speak like a CFO who hadn't just been dethroned by his younger sister. You can't just suspend executive operations. There are protocols. There are agreements. I looked at him, calm. And now there's a new owner. He opened his mouth again. I didn't let him finish. Lucien Langdon, I said, clicking to the next slide on the screen, is hereby placed on immediate administrative leave pending a full financial and ethical audit. Gasps. A few board members shifted uncomfortably, but no one spoke up for him. Misuse of company funds, I continued, inappropriate bonus adjustments, and suspicious transfer activity. Your review starts today. Lucien turned to Dad. Are you just going to sit there and let her do this? Dad didn't look at me, didn't look at anyone. He stared at his lap like he hadn't seen any of this coming. Sienna Langdon, I continued, turning slightly, is also suspended, effective immediately. She stiffened. On what grounds? Use of PR funds for personal branding. Private stylists billed under client acquisition. Attendance at events that had no strategic benefit. Do you want me to keep going? Sienna's cheeks flushed red. I represented this company with dignity. You represented yourself with company money, I paused. That era is over. That, my mother stood up finally, clutching her purse with trembling fingers. Avery, sweetheart, please, these are family matters. You don't have to humiliate your own blood. I met her eyes. This isn't humiliation. This is accountability. We raised you better than this, she whispered. I almost laughed. You raised me to look the part, to smile, nod, and stay quiet when the men talked. You raised me to decorate a room, not run it. She blinked. That hit somewhere deep. I softened my voice. You didn't raise me to lead, but I learned anyway, on my own, because you didn't ask what I needed. You just assumed I failed when I stepped off your path. My father finally spoke. This company was built on trust, on family, that's the culture. I turned toward him. No, I said. It was built on control, on favoritism, on outdated power structures where family was only used when it benefited the top. "You're bitter?" he replied, his voice cold. "No, I'm aware. There's a difference." I changed the slide again. New policy, performance-based advancement. I spoke clearly, deliberately. From this moment forward, Langdon Holdings will operate as a merit-based organisation. No more automatic promotions based on last names. No more corporate nepotism. No more shopping allowances for spouses. Sienna looked like she might faint. Lucien mumbled something under his breath. Dad sat back, folding his arms like a disappointed king watching his kingdom slip away. But I wasn't done. I've also reinstated severance negotiations for employees laid off during the last restructuring, ones this board claimed were necessary, but were really just about boosting profit margins. A woman at the end of the table, HR director I hadn't seen in years, brought her hand to her mouth. "I spoke to 3 of them personally," I added. "One of them is a single dad whose job funded his daughter's leukemia treatment. He deserved better." The room was so quiet you could hear the projector hum. Then Mom's voice, soft, like a final attempt. "We can discuss this calmly, as a family." I turned toward her. "You called me too emotional when I disagreed with Lucien in a meeting. You voted me off the board, and not once, not one single time, did any of you ask what I'd been building all this time." I looked around the room. "You thought I'd disappeared, that I was nothing, that I'd faded into irrelevance because I worked from home in sweatpants." I gave a small smile. "But I built an empire in those sweatpants, and now I'm building a new kind of legacy, one that doesn't revolve around holiday parties and inherited privilege." Dad leaned forward again. "You really think you're the answer to everything? That you can fix this with slides and speeches?" I stared him dead in the eye. "No, but I'm the one who finally had the guts to try." I stood, straightened the hem of my black sweater, closed my laptop. "I'm not asking for your approval. I'm not here for apologies. I'm here to make sure this company finally stands for something besides itself." I gathered my things, walked to the door, paused. "Lucien, your performance review begins in 20 minutes. I suggest you start collecting your files." I didn't wait for his reply. Ever been told you're too emotional to lead, only to become the one who rewrites the rules? I never wanted revenge. I just wanted fairness. But when no one else is willing to deliver it, maybe you were meant to be the one who does. Let that sit with you for a second. It was almost poetic. How quiet the office felt now. Langdon Holdings, once buzzing with overconfidence, had grown eerily still. Maybe it was the shock. Maybe it was the new reality setting in. But to me, it felt like, finally, the noise was gone. I walked the halls not as a visitor, not as the exiled daughter, but as the one person in that building who had earned her place without permission. Later that afternoon, I entered what used to be Lucien's office. The walls were still covered in awards, mostly inherited, not earned. Photos of him shaking hands with governors, cutting ribbons, standing beside my father in matching suits. A legacy built more on optics than outcome. I stood in front of his old desk and slowly peeled the brass nameplate off. Lucien Langdon, Chief Financial Officer. I held it for a moment, then I dropped it into the drawer and pulled out the new one from my bag. Avery L. Rivers, CEO. I pressed it gently into place. Outside the glass wall of the office, I could see employees peeking through. People I hadn't spoken to in years. Some were probably still trying to piece it together. Others, I recognized the look in their eyes, hope, maybe for the first time. The next day, a press conference was held in the Langdon Auditorium. The company's acquisition had hit every major headline. Remote CEO buys out billion-dollar family empire. Who is Avery L. Rivers? Daughter ousted, returns as owner. Here's what we know. I stood behind the podium wearing the same black sweater from the dinner party. No makeup team, no stylist, just me, real. "Good afternoon," I began, calmly. "As of this week, Langdon Holdings is officially a subsidiary of Falcon Ridge Capital, and moving forward we'll be operating under a new model." I outlined the restructure. emphasized transparency, shared initiatives for employee-led innovation, announced the reinstatement of programs scrapped by the old guard. And then I paused. I know many of you remember me as the girl who used to sit quietly in the back of meetings, the one they called too emotional, the one they said didn't belong in the boardroom. I looked directly into the cameras. They were wrong, and now we get to write a new story together. That evening, I returned home, not to a penthouse, not to some new mansion, to the same one-bedroom apartment I'd started in, because I wasn't done yet. I sat at the same desk I'd worked from all those years. The window still looked out over the same alleyway. The same sounds drifted in. City buses, distant sirens, footsteps on pavement. But everything had changed, because this time I wasn't working from a place of survival. I was building something out of choice, not to prove myself, not to win their approval, but to build something that couldn't be taken from me. The next morning, my phone buzzed with a message from HR. Lucien declined the performance review. He submitted a resignation letter. Charlotte too. Sienna's final day is Friday. I put the phone down, not with triumph, but with clarity. Sometimes justice isn't loud. Sometimes it's quiet. It looks like people walking away from chairs they were never qualified to sit in. Around 10 a.m., I walked into my new office, the one overlooking the city, full of light, no longer bearing anyone else's name. My assistant handed me a mug. It said, "Built, not inherited." I laughed softly. Exactly. Then the email arrived, a forwarded message from my mother. No subject line, no greeting, just 6 words. "We didn't know. Please call us." I stared at it for a long while. My cursor hovered over reply, then moved to archive. Because here's the truth they never understood. I wasn't waiting for them to come around. I wasn't trying to make them proud. I didn't need them to say sorry. I just needed them to get out of the way. That afternoon, I met with the new board, all elected based on merit, not bloodline. We reviewed quarterly goals, greenlit a new employee equity program, and approved a mentorship pipeline for rising women leaders. Then I stood, ready to close the meeting. "Any final thoughts?" one of them asked. I smiled. "Yeah." I looked at the chair I was sitting in. I used to think I needed this seat to mean something. I tapped the table. But it's not the chair that gives you power. It's what you do once you're in it. Have you ever had to walk away from the people who were supposed to believe in you, just to become the person they swore you'd never be? If that line hits anywhere near your heart, tell me. Tell me what chair they said you couldn't sit in. Tell me what room you weren't invited into, or just drop a still building in the comments. Because maybe, like me, you weren't meant to follow their blueprint. Maybe you were meant to draw your own.